Dr Gannon, you're also a leading obstetrician. You've delivered thousands of babies. How concerned are you about the impact of smoke on babies in utero, and what do we actually know about the impacts on newborns who were born during or soon after the most recent bushfires?
Well, the association between air pollution and adverse pregnancy outcomes is fairly well established, and there's robust evidence from developed countries like the United States, Canada and Australia, which proves that. So we're seeing anecdotal stories come out of the impact of this year's bushfire season in New South Wales and Victoria and how that's impacting on those babies that are now being born now from women who were exposed at a critical early stage of pregnancy. So not only is there the impact of smoke, but there's also the potential impact of exposure to other things that we know are toxic, like carbon monoxide, like ozone, like asbestos. These are all poisons, which we've got some evidence to show they're bad for the developing baby.
And is it that earlier stage of pregnancy that is more dangerous in terms of the greater impacts from things like smoke inhalation? And is it likely, do you think, that a baby born that suffered from some of these issues early on are then going to continue to have health issues throughout their lives as a result?
Well, one of the key associations between exposure to air pollution and specifically to the smoke from what the North Americans call wildfires and what we call bushfires, there's a clear association with prematurity, preterm birth, and there's an association with low birth weight, potentially with growth restriction due to harm to the placenta. And we know that they're things that can have lifelong health impacts. So it's certainly an area that still requires greater research. It's a long way from inevitable that those thousands of women who are pregnant during the bushfire season this year in Australia will have adverse pregnancy outcomes. The science is a great deal more complicated than that, but certainly we would not be surprised if we see, as a result of this year's bushfires, and sadly as a result of almost certainly the higher proportion of severe weather events we're likely to see in coming years, it won't surprise us at all if we see an impact on things like the rate of premature birth and on things like the rate of babies born at low birth weight.
So as we approach the upcoming bushfire season, what advice do you have for pregnant women? Should they be physically moving away from bushfire-affected areas if possible, or do they need to stay indoors? Should they be wearing masks outside? What's the best approach?
Well, I think one thing we need to do is to put this level of risk in context. Not a week goes by without another report about the dangers of something like paracetamol or something like caffeine for pregnant women. My personal observation is that pregnant women year on year seem to be becoming more anxious about their pregnancies. That's not helpful. And indeed, if we look at this year's bushfire season, it's hard to separate the mental health impacts of seeing communities destroyed or communities at risk, jobs destroyed. It's hard to differentiate the mental health consequences of the season from the physical health consequences. But certainly if we're talking about active fires in the area, it's smart for pregnant women to minimise their exposure, to stay inside, to make appropriate changes to air conditioning systems that they have. And if they are going out in public areas, then some masks might be appropriate. We're seeing a lot greater literacy about the word N95 mask. Most Australians have now heard of an N95 mask. I don't think they had 12 months ago. It's probably appropriate that people do whatever they can in terms of evaporators, what they do with air conditioning, wearing masks to minimise their exposure to smoke.
Dr Gannon, as former president of the AMA, I know you've been following the COVID policy debate very closely. What do you say to people who argue that the lockdowns, particularly the ones we're seeing in Victoria, have been too harsh, that the risks of the virus have been overcome by the other negative impacts we're seeing, like financial hardship, mental health problems, etc.?
Look, I think the most important thing to say is that this is not a binary issue. There's room for nuance, there's room for finesse between the rip the Band-Aid off approach of Sweden and some other countries, as against the severe lockdown policy being pursued now by the Victorian government. I'm thinking right now of my nieces, my goddaughters in Melbourne, friends, colleagues struggling with the hard lockdown and the mental health consequences that will come from that, the physical health consequences that will come from unemployment, recession, etc. So there needs to be a nuanced approach to the absolute importance of the public health measures being put in place in various parts of Australia and the need to open up, understanding the public health risks of doing that. We all desperately hope that we're going to see the development of a safe and effective vaccine. But if a vaccine's not developed, then we don't seem to have an exit strategy in Australia. So I think that we need more humanity in our approach to border closures. We need to be conscious of the border communities that exist in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, and on the South Australian border. And we need to have some humanity when we consider hard border lockdowns, when people do have loved ones on the other side of the country. Now, it's commonplace for me to have my patients want the support of their mother or their sister to come from overseas or from interstate. Now, the hard border here in Western Australia has made that extremely difficult. Every week I write letters asking for a bit of humanity and a bit of compassion. So we need to find that sweet spot between the public health triumph that we're seeing from border closures, but somewhere along the line, think of the measures that recognise that opening up business, opening up communities is equally important.
Dr Michael Gannon, appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, Ash.